One of the coolest sounds you can learn how to make on an analog synth is the sound of a zap. And one of the viewers, calling themselves Mark, writes this: "Seeing how you made me go out and buy a Behringer Pro-1, you're welcome, can you show us and me how to program the famous KRAFTWERK ZAP?" I think that's the sound you're looking for. It's pretty easy to make on any analog synth, but there's a trick to it. The first thing you got to understand is what is actually making that zap sound, and that is the sound of a sine wave dropping in pitch really quickly. That's what makes it go like this. Very similar to the way analog kick is made, although slightly different. But the first thing we've clearly got to do is go over to our Behringer Pro-1 and put the oscillator into sine wave mode. Whereupon it turns out that there isn't an obvious way to do that. We've got sawtooth and squares and even a triangle, but we haven't got a sine wave. And you're going to find this on a lot of analog synths. So really the trick is, how do you get a sine wave out of an analog synth? And the answer is that you use the filter. Let me show you how. I just sort of reset this a little bit. So on both the filter and the volume envelopes, I'll put full sustain up. Does this look okay? Turn on, let's say, sawtooth. Open the filter, of course. There is the sound of a sawtooth wave. Definitely not a sine wave. And if I were to try and drop that in pitch really quickly, that's not going to sound like a zap. So what I'm going to do to get a sine wave is this. I'm going to put the filter into what's sometimes called self-oscillation mode by just cranking up the resonance like you wouldn't believe. Now at the moment, you can hear the oscillator, and when I turn the oscillator off, you can't hear anything. And the reason why you can't hear anything is because the frequency that's being boosted, essentially the frequency of the sine wave, is at the cutoff frequency, and if that's about 20,000 hertz, which it probably is, that's way outside our hearing range. So I'm going to play a sustained note, and I'm going to bring this cutoff frequency down. All of a sudden, you can hear there you are. That's more or less the sound of a sine wave. So there you are. You can use that for all your World War II sound effects. And that's pretty much a sine wave. The reason why I say pretty much is because if it were a sine wave, it wouldn't have any harmonics at all. And this is a little dirty. It does have some harmonics if you call it up on a histogram. And that's just because, you know, it's analog and maybe the preamps are distorting a little or whatever. But that fundamentally is a sine wave. So now what do we do with it? Well, let me, in a very mysterious way, put down my microphone almost like it's not connected. And let me show you. That's a zap sound. And depending on the way I do it, you can actually start to hear how you could even get kick sounds out of that. But this fundamentally is the zap. Okay, so all we need is we just need an envelope to drop the pitch. Well, that's pretty easy. First is put some envelope on, take off the sustain, and now let's give it a bit of decay. Okay, that's dropping the pitch. And obviously where I've got the cutoff frequency is essentially the final destination. So that's a zap. Now you've got a residual sort of fundamental note that you perceive, which is the note where it lands. The best way of getting rid of that is simply to take off the sustain on the VCA and give it a bit of decay instead. So that's pretty good. Sounds a bit disco, sounds a bit long. And the best way of tuning in the right kind of percussive zap, as with anything percussive, in fact, really as with any kind of sound, is to do it in context. So if I start a sort of a beat here, and now put some zaps in. Right, it's far too long. So I've now taken all the decay off, which is all the pitch drop. I mean, that's actually pretty good. So notice that the longer that I make the zap, the more squelchy it gets, but you lose that hard definition, which isn't very good for a part like this. And that is the KRAFTWERK ZAP, and all you really need now for the Tour de France sound is to have some heavy breathing from guys riding bicycles. But we can just go one step further, which is to add a bit of delay on it. And I've got my usual terrible delay rigged up. So first thing is I'm going to raise my camera so we can see it. I'll tap the tempo. Okay. And that's a dotted 8 delay, which is, I think, pretty nice. And I can even put some flange on it. Okay. Hours of fun. That's the KRAFTWERK ZAP. Thanks for watching. See you next time.